we're continuing in the dorsal cavity here, down into the thin posterior vertebral canal, which runs from the base of the cranium to the sacrum. And it travels in the midline of the body and contains the spinal cord, the roots of the spinal nerves, the vertebral meninges, and the blood vessels. So let's first define exactly what is meant by the vertebral canal. So the bony elements of the vertebral canal are of course provided by the vertebrae, those knobbly bones you feel in your back, and they look something like one of these, depending on where in the vertebral column you're looking. Regardless of their differences, most vertebrae bear many of the same landmarks. So that bump, which you can feel on your back, is this structure here, the spinous process. Each vertebra has an obvious hole in the middle called a vertebral foramen, and these foramina, when stacked on top of one another, make the vertebral canal, which houses the spinal cord. There are various types of ligaments and other connective tissues holding the vertebrae together, and intervertebral discs between the individual bones, which we'll look in closer detail in just a moment. So what makes up the actual borders of this vertebral canal then? So with the spinal cord located here within the vertebral canal, we can see this bony structure anterior to it, which is called the vertebral body. Its posterior aspect forms the anterior border of the vertebral canal. An intervertebral disc is sandwiched between the vertebral body, so between the vertebrae, and the intervertebral discs would be considered the anterior border of the vertebral canal. Attached to the posterior surfaces of the vertebral bodies is the posterior longitudinal ligament, running the length of the vertebral column and supporting the intervertebral joints. Laterally, the borders of the vertebral canal are incomplete, which allows spaces to allow the spinal nerves to depart from the spinal cord into the peripheral nervous system. Where a bony wall exists, it's formed by the pedicles of each vertebra, and these are found between the vertebral body and these processes just here, which are known as the transverse processes of the vertebra. And finally, the posterior border of the vertebral canal is this piece of bone, which is known as the lamina of the vertebra. Okay, so I'm going to switch to a different illustration now, which shows a transverse section of the vertebral column in situ, so that we can get a better appreciation of the contents of the vertebral canal. So of course, located centrally within the vertebral canal, we have the spinal cord here, which runs along the length of the superior 3/4 of the vertebral canal. Running along the periphery of the vertebral canal is a small space, which is known as the epidural space, and this contains extradural fat, providing some protection and cushioning to the spinal cord, which is important given that the vertebral column is a somewhat mobile structure that moves as our core bends and flexes. As the name suggests, this extradural fat is outside of the dura mater, and continuous with the internal layer of dura in the cranial cavity, this meningeal layer also protects the spinal cord. And inside of it again is the arachnoid mater. The arachnoid and dura mater join together at the spinal rootlets and create a tight junction between the spinal nerves and the outside world. Cerebrospinal fluid fills the subarachnoid space, and which again provides further cushioning and protection to the spinal cord. So just as we witnessed in the cranial cavity, we almost can't see the pia mater here as it is so thin and closely knit to the spinal cord. But despite its fine and delicate structure, the pia mater plays an extremely important role in protection of the brain and the spinal cord. And that basically sums up the contents of the vertebral canal for the majority of its length. That being said, the spinal cord undergoes some changes at approximately the level of the L1 or L2 vertebra. So let's take a closer look and see some more. So the spinal cord ends at L1 or L2 and becomes the cauda equina, which is effectively a bundle of spinal nerves that exits the vertebral canal at the respective level of the spinal nerve. And these nerves are surrounded by the dura and arachnoid mater into the sacrum, while the pia mater travels the whole way to the coccyx as the filum terminale, acting as an anchor for the spinal cord. Okay, so that's it for both the